Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're taking a closer look at the fascinating connection between personality and the brain.
Yeah, we'll be exploring Chapter 8 of the Personality Puzzle to uncover how this incredible organ actually shapes who we are.
The personality puzzle? Cool. So no cracking open skulls today, right?
No scalpels needed. But we will be diving deep into brain anatomy, delving into the amazing world of brain chemistry, and even exploring some pretty mind-bending case studies.
Mind-bending, huh? Sounds intriguing. So where do we begin with something as complex as, well, the brain?
Well, with anything complex, you have to start with the basics. We'll start with the foundation of the nervous system.
Okay, back to biology class, I guess. So remind me, what are those building blocks again?
Think neurons, dendrites, axons, all those microscopic wonders that work together to form this intricate network.
Wow, it's mind-boggling when you think about all those tiny cells communicating with each other, constantly sending and receiving messages. It's like a bustling city.
It is a city with different regions, each specializing in certain tasks. For example, we have the amygdala deep within the brain, playing a crucial role in processing emotions, especially fear and anxiety.
Oh yeah, the amygdala, the one that's always on high alert, scanning for potential threats in the world around us. Doesn't it sometimes make mistakes, though?
Well, like any part of the brain, it can be influenced by various factors. Remember the case of Charles Whitman, the Texas sniper?
Oh yeah, I remember reading about that. Tragic case. He had a tumor near his amygdala, right?
Exactly. Whitman went on that horrific shooting spree at the University of Texas, even killing his wife and mother beforehand.
It's disturbing, but it does make you wonder about the role of the amygdala in aggression. To what extent do these brain abnormalities actually influence behavior?
That's the big question, isn't it? The balance between biology and free will. It's a complex issue, for sure. But let's move on to another key player, the frontal lobes. They're essential for so much of what makes us human.
I've heard about those. Aren't they involved in things like planning and making decisions?
Absolutely. The frontal lobes are essential for higher level thinking, planning, and, for our discussion today, especially important for emotional regulation.
Emotional regulation, huh? Interesting. So is that where the famous case of Phineas Gage comes in?
You got it. Phineas Gage, the railroad worker who had that horrific accident, an iron rod went straight through his skull, damaging his frontal lobes.
Yeah, I remember learning about him in psychology class. It's incredible that he even survived that.
It is. But what's been more fascinating is that while he survived, his personality underwent a dramatic shift. Before the accident, he was known as being responsible, well-respected. But after,
Let me guess. Not so much.
well, he became impulsive, irritable, prone to outbursts, and using profanity. It was like a completely different person.
It's like his brain's filter for appropriate behavior was just gone. It's tragic, but it really highlights how crucial the frontal lobes are in shaping who we are. So, are those the only two brain areas we need to worry about?
Not quite. The brain is a complex system, and there are many other areas involved in personality. Take the anterior cingulate, for example.
Anterior cingulate. Never heard of it. What's that one do?
Well, think of it as the brain's error detection system. It helps us manage our emotional responses, especially when things don't go as planned. When we face unexpected challenges or setbacks.
Oh, so if someone's constantly worrying or stressing about what might go wrong, their anterior cingulate could be working overtime. Like mine, probably.
It's possible, but hey, we all have different levels of activity in these brain regions. It's part of what makes us unique. And the anterior cingulate is particularly active in people who score high in a personality trait called neuroticism.
Neuroticism. Right. Okay, I see the connection. But back to the brain for a minute. How do scientists actually study this stuff? Peeking inside a living brain seems pretty impossible.
It is a challenge, but researchers have come up with some pretty ingenious ways to study the brain. One approach is to look at, well, unfortunately, brain damage. They observe how personality changes when specific areas are compromised.
You mean like what happened with Phineas Gage?
Exactly. We learn a lot from these types of cases. And ethically conducted animal studies can also provide valuable insights, without having to wait for unfortunate accidents to happen.
Makes sense. But sometimes you need more control over the research, right? Not just rely on what nature gives you. What about directly stimulating specific areas of the brain?
That's another technique, though mainly done in animal studies. Techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, allow researchers to temporarily knock out a brain area, to see how it affects behavior.
Ah, like creating a temporary virtual lesion. Pretty cool. But what if you want to see the brain in action in real time? Is that where brain imaging comes in?
You got it. EEG, MEG, PET, and fMRI, they all offer a window into brain activity. fMRI is particularly powerful because it can actually map blood flow in the brain, showing which areas are active during certain tasks, or when someone's experiencing specific emotions.
I've heard of fMRI, but isn't interpreting all that data kind of tricky? The brain is a noisy place, right?
It is. It can be tough to pinpoint the exact brain regions responsible for complex things like personality traits, and the amount of data can be overwhelming. But fMRI is still an invaluable tool, and the field of brain imaging is constantly evolving.
It's amazing how far we've come in understanding the brain. But it's not just about structure, right? There's a whole chemical symphony happening in there as well.
You're right, we can't forget about neurotransmitters and hormones. The brain's chemical messengers play a critical role in shaping our thoughts, feelings, and ultimately our behavior.
It's like a complex cocktail of chemicals influencing our personalities. This is where it gets really interesting. I can't wait to dive into that next. So we've got this intricate network of brain regions, all playing their parts, but then we add in the chemical messengers, the neurotransmitters, and hormones. Seems like it could get pretty complicated.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity, but it's this interplay of structure and chemistry that makes the brain so fascinating. Let's start with dopamine, often called the motivation molecule.
Dopamine. I've heard it's the chemical that gives us that rush of pleasure. When we achieve something rewarding, or when we experience something novel and exciting.
Right. Dopamine is definitely involved in reward processing, motivation, and even novelty seeking. And it's been linked to the personality trait of extroversion, where people are drawn to social stimulation and new experiences.
That makes sense. I mean, think about those who love trying new foods, exploring new places, or even engaging in adventurous activities. Maybe they just have a really active dopamine system.
It's possible, but dopamine isn't the only chemical influencing our personalities. What about serotonin? Have you heard of that one?
Oh, yeah. Serotonin, I've always heard it referred to as the feel-good neurotransmitter. Isn't it involved in mood?
Serotonin is definitely involved in mood regulation, but it's more complex than just being a feel-good chemical, although it is involved in promoting feelings of well-being and emotional stability. But, low levels of serotonin have been linked to things like depression, anxiety, and even impulsivity.
Right, and that's where those popular antidepressants come in, like Prozac, they're SSRIs, right?
Exactly, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they basically increase serotonin levels in the brain. To help rebalance things, can really alleviate symptoms of depression and anxiety for a lot of people.
Of course, it's always important to talk to a healthcare professional before making any decisions about medication. But back to serotonin and personality. It seems like this neurotransmitter might be connected to more than just, avoiding negative emotions. Could it also play a role in personality traits associated with stability, like conscientiousness and agreeableness?
That's a great question. And yeah, some studies suggest that might be the case. Individuals who are highly conscientious, organized, disciplined, they might have a really well-regulated serotonin system. And that could be contributing to their steady, dependable nature.
So it's like serotonin helps provide that solid foundation, that ability to stay calm and focused even when things get a little chaotic.
That's a great way to put it. Now, let's move on to another fascinating chemical messenger, testosterone, often called the male hormone, but it's actually present in both men and women, just in different amounts, of course.
Testosterone. Yeah, it's got a bit of a reputation, often associated with aggression and dominance. But I know it's way more nuanced than that.
You're right. While testosterone is linked to aggression, it's also associated with things like assertiveness, competitiveness, and even risk-taking behavior. And what's really interesting is that research has shown that testosterone levels can actually fluctuate depending on the situation.
Oh, yeah. Like, if someone wins a competition, their testosterone levels go up. But if they lose, their levels drop. It's almost like a biological scorecard for dominance.
That's a great analogy. Testosterone is definitely part of this feedback loop, responding to social cues and, influencing our behavior in turn. And it's not just about physical competition either. Studies have shown that even things like driving a luxury car or succeeding in a challenging cognitive task can lead to a temporary boost in testosterone.
Wow. It's amazing how our biology and our experiences are constantly interacting and influencing each other. Now, what about cortisol, the stress hormone?
Cortisol. Cortisol is crucial for our ability to cope with stress. When we encounter a threat, our bodies release cortisol, preparing us to either fight or flee, helps mobilize energy stores, and increases alertness. It's part of our survival mechanism.
Right, but too much cortisol can be a bad thing, right? Like if someone's constantly stressed out.
Exactly. Chronically high levels of cortisol, like you see in individuals with anxiety or depression, can have some really detrimental effects on both physical and mental health. It can suppress the immune system, disrupt sleep patterns, even contribute to cognitive decline. It's not good.
So it's all about balance. A little cortisol helps us rise to the challenge, but too much can wreak havoc. It seems like our brains are constantly trying to find that sweet spot.
Well said. Our brains are incredibly adaptive, constantly striving to maintain equilibrium, in this complex world. But remember, it's not just these individual chemicals acting in isolation, it's their interplay with each other and with different brain regions that creates this complexity of personality.
It's like a symphony, all these different instruments contributing to the overall sound. Okay, so we've talked about specific brain regions and these powerful chemical messengers, but how does this all connect to the big five personality traits? Extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness.
That's where we start to see the bigger picture, how biology and personality come together. Remember those meta traits we discussed earlier? Stability and plasticity.
Right. Stability being steady, consistent, resilient. While plasticity is all about being adaptable, open to new experiences, flexible. So how do these meta traits actually map onto the big five?
Well, according to psychologist Colin DeYoung, stability encompasses emotional stability, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, while plasticity includes extroversion and openness to experience.
Okay, so the stable folks are generally calm, dependable, and get along well with others, while the plastic folks are more adventurous, outgoing, always up for trying new things. Makes sense. But what's the biological connection here?
Well, DeYoung suggests that serotonin, that neurotransmitter we talked about earlier, is closely associated with a stability metatrit.
So those steady, reliable people might have a particularly well-regulated serotonin system, keeping their emotions on an even keel.
Exactly. Their brains are efficient at maintaining that emotional balance, leading to a generally calm and consistent demeanor.
Interesting. And what about those high in plasticity? What's going on in their brains?
Plasticity, on the other hand, seems to be more linked to dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with motivation and reward.
Ah, dopamine, the chemical that drives us to seek out rewards and new experiences. So those extroverted, open-minded individuals might have a more active dopamine system, always propelling them towards novelty and excitement.
Exactly. Their brains are wired to find pleasure and excitement in exploring new possibilities, always seeking that dopamine rush.
It's amazing how these fundamental personality differences might be reflected in our brain chemistry. Can we look at specific brain structures and see how they relate to each of the big five traits?
We can. It's a fascinating area of research. For example, let's take extroversion. We've already discussed its link to dopamine. And a key brain structure involved in reward processing is the nucleus accumbens, located deep within the brain.
So when extroverts experience something rewarding, their nucleus accumbens just lights up.
Pretty much. It's a region that plays a crucial role in motivation, pleasure, and reinforcement, all of which are tied to extroversion.
Makes sense. Now, what about agreeableness? What's happening in the brains of those friendly, cooperative people?
Agreeableness is a bit more complex, but research suggests that several brain regions are involved, including the superior temporal sulcus and the posterior cingulate cortex.
The superior temporal sulcus, that rings a bell. Didn't we talk about that earlier in relation to social cues?
We did. It's a region that's involved in processing social information, like facial expressions, body language, even the tone of someone's voice. Agreeable individuals might be particularly attuned to these social cues, allowing them to navigate social situations with ease and empathy.
Makes sense. They're the ones who can read a room and know how to make people feel comfortable. So what about conscientiousness? What's going on in those organized, disciplined brains?
Conscientiousness appears to be linked to several brain regions, including the middle frontal gyrus and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Both of these areas are involved in planning, self-control, and inhibiting impulses.
So those who excel at planning, meeting deadlines, resisting temptations, they might have particularly active frontal lobes, helping them stay focused and on track.
That's a great to put it. Their brains are well equipped to stay organized, prioritize tasks, and maintain self-discipline.
It's like having a superpowered executive control center up there. Now, what about neuroticism? We've talked about the anterior cingulate being involved, but are there other brain regions linked to this trait?
There are. Neuroticism is associated with a heightened sensitivity to threat and negative emotions, so the amygdala, the brain's fear center, plays a big role.
So those prone to anxiety, worry, negative emotions, they might have a more reactive amygdala, picking up on those potential threats more readily.
Yeah, their brains are sort of wired to perceive threats, leading to, a heightened emotional response to stressful situations.
It's not that they're intentionally being negative. Their brains are just processing information differently. Okay, so we've covered 4 of the big 5 traits. What about openness to experience? What's happening in those curious, imaginative brains?
Openness to experience is a fascinating one. It's associated with several brain regions, including the medial prefrontal cortex and areas involved in processing sensory information.
The medial prefrontal cortex, that's involved in self-reflection and understanding other people's perspectives, right?
It is, and open individuals tend to be more introspective, reflective, and open to considering different viewpoints. They're also often drawn to art, music, and other forms of creative expression which involve that heightened sensory processing.
That makes sense. They're the ones who are always asking questions, exploring new ideas, finding beauty in the world around them. So we've taken this whirlwind tour of the brain structures and chemical messengers associated with each of the big five personality traits. It's incredible how these seemingly abstract psychological constructs have such concrete biological underpinnings.
It is remarkable, and as we delve deeper into the neuroscience of personality, we gain a more nuanced understanding of how our biology and our experiences interact to shape who we are. But it's not a one-way street. Our biology influences our personality, but our personality and experiences also influence our biology.
Right, it's that two-way street you mentioned earlier. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Of course, our genes lay the groundwork, but our experiences can actually modify the expression of those genes and even shape the structure and function of our brains.
So our brains are constantly being molded by our environment and our choices.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the brain's remarkable plasticity. It's not fixed or immutable. It's constantly adapting and evolving throughout our lives.
Wow, that's incredible. So by actively engaging in new experiences and challenging ourselves, we can literally change our brains.
We can. It's pretty amazing.
It's empowering. It means we have more control over our personalities and destinies than we might think. But I remember that comment about, focusing too much on the biology of personality being like reducing someone to like a juicy gland. There's a lot more to it than just brain structure and chemicals, right?
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to avoid reducing personality to just a collection of brain regions and chemicals. We can't lose sight of the individual's unique experiences, social context, and cultural influences.
It's like trying to understand a symphony by only analyzing the individual notes. You'd miss the melody, the harmony, the emotional impact, the essence of the music itself.
Well said. While neuroscience provides invaluable insights, it's just one piece of the puzzle. We need to approach personality with a holistic lens, considering the interplay of biology, psychology, and social context.
So where do we go from here? What's the so what of all this? So we've journeyed through this intricate landscape of the brain, explored key regions, and we've delved into that fascinating world of neurotransmitters and hormones. We even saw how the big five personality traits might be reflected in this biological symphony. But where does it all leave us? What's the so what?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, what does this all mean for understanding ourselves and others? Well, for starters, it really underscores the fact that personality isn't just some airy-fairy concept. It has a real basis, a tangible basis in our biology.
But it's not just about our upbringing or even the choices we make. Our genes, our brain structure, our chemical makeup, they all contribute to who we are. But like you said, it's a two-way street. It's not about biological determinism. We're not just puppets of our genes.
Exactly. This knowledge should empower us, not limit us. I mean, understanding those biological underpinnings of personality can help us make informed choices about our lives, from the environments we choose to the activities we engage in.
Yeah, like if I know I'm prone to anxiety because of a more reactive amygdala, maybe I could be more proactive about managing stress, practice mindfulness, or even seek professional help if needed.
Right. It's about working with our biology, not against it. And, it also fosters empathy and understanding towards others. I mean, if we recognize that someone's irritability might be linked to low serotonin levels, where that their shyness stems from a heightened sensitivity to social threat, maybe we're less likely to judge them harshly.
Yeah, it's like that saying, don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes. But in this case, it's more like, don't judge a brain until you've understood its wiring.
Ha! I like that. It's about recognizing that personality is this complex tapestry, woven from threads of biology, experience, and social context.
It also has implications for, how we approach mental health. If we can identify those specific biological mechanisms underlying things like depression or anxiety, we might be able to develop more targeted and effective treatments.
For sure. This is, the exciting frontier of personalized medicine. Treatments tailored to an individual's unique biological profile. It's about moving beyond that one-size-fits-all approach and recognizing that, well, what works for one person might not work for another.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about the possibilities. But on a more philosophical level, I feel like this dive into the biology of personality raises some pretty big questions about, the nature of free will. If our brains are so influential in shaping who we are, do we really have control over our choices and actions?
The age-old debate. It's a question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries. And, well, neuroscience can shed light on the biological mechanisms involved in decision-making, but it doesn't necessarily provide a definitive answer.
Right? It's a bit of a paradox, like that quote, "We are free to choose, but we are not free from the consequences of our choices." Our biology might predispose us towards certain traits or behaviors, but ultimately we still have the capacity to make choices and shape our own destinies.
I agree. It's about recognizing the interplay of biology and free will. We're both products of our genes and architects of our own lives. It's a delicate balance.
And that brings us to, I think, the ultimate takeaway. The biology of personality isn't about putting people in boxes or reducing them to just their brain chemistry. It's about understanding the foundation upon which our unique selves are built, and recognizing that we're both biological beings and conscious agents with the power to shape our own lives.
Beautifully said. And it really highlights the importance of continued exploration. The more we learn about the brain, well, the more we learn about ourselves, our potential, and our capacity for, growth and change.
So to our listeners, we leave you with this thought-provoking question. Knowing what you now know about this intricate connection between your brain and your personality, what choices will you make to nurture your well-being, embrace your strength, and become the best version of yourself? Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into that fascinating puzzle that is you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.